Hello and welcome. In this video, I want to share my thoughts on reading through the Lord of the Rings trilogy for the first time. And as a nearly lifelong Lord of the Rings movie fan, I had never read the books before, so I went through, read them all, and finished recently. I wanted to share my thoughts, just kind of comparing the two different versions of the story, and just overall my thoughts on the differences, the similarities, all that kind of stuff. So let's get ready to jump in. So as I just mentioned, I have been a nearly lifelong Lord of the Rings movie fan. I first watched these movies when I was about 12 or 13 years old and have since seen them I don't even know how many times. I absolutely adore the movies. I love the extended versions of the films. I really like the Hobbit movies despite their flaws. So reading through the Lord of the Rings trilogy is something you would have expected of me based on my love of the franchise, but I hadn't. And so finally I started reading these like years ago, maybe 5 years ago, and I finally committed to finishing reading them. A big part of that was because I got the books on Audible, and these are the versions read by Andy Serkis, who plays Gollum and Smeagol in the movies. And so it was really incredible getting to hear the story told through his voice, with all the different character voices that he comes up with throughout the story. He does an amazing job throughout the audiobooks. So if you haven't heard those audiobooks, I highly recommend them. They're the reason I was able to get through these books so quickly, because I'm such a slow reader, and I thoroughly enjoyed that experience. So starting things off, I would say there is definitely a pacing difference between the movies and the book. In the movies, everything moves at a fairly quick pace because there's a lot that they have to include in the 3 or so hours that each movie is for the story. So there's a decent bit that they condensed down. There's some stuff they dropped out from the books, but overall, I thought the pacing was still really solid comparing the movies to the books. I think in the structure and the format that is a book, I thought the pacing really worked well for that version of the story. Obviously, in the books, it takes place more over a number of years, whereas in the movies, it kind of seems like it takes place over like a month or two. So it really doesn't seem like a ton of time has gone by, but still, nonetheless, I really enjoyed both versions of that story when it comes to the pacing. I liked that in the book, we get to spend longer times in the conversations. Part of that, I think, is also thanks to Andy Serkis reading and the great job he does with that. So getting to spend more time in those conversations, a little bit more depth to the characters, it all works within that format of the book. But then conveying that into the movies, you understand why they had to cut out certain things like Tom Bombadil, or make some characters a little less significant to the greater story, that kind of thing. So I understand the differences, and I think both of them, as far as the pacing goes, really worked well in their own right. Now, the difference that I found most stand out and more prominent, I think, was Aragorn's character. Now, I love Aragorn in the movies. I've always picked him as probably my favorite character. I think his arc is the most interesting and exciting. But in the book, he's a very different character, actually. In the book, he already has Anduril when we meet him in Bree, and he is actually seeking to kind of come back and be the Return of the King, take over the throne and stuff. So it's a really interesting difference that was made between the books and the movies. Now, I really liked both versions of it. I think I'm a little more partial to the movie version just because that's the version I've been around for a majority of the time of me loving this series. I liked the way they did it in the book too. So I think that was the most interesting difference to me between the book and the movie. And I would love to know what you think is the most interesting difference as well. So let me know in the comments below on that. Now, for much of Fellowship of the Ring, I think aside from Tom Bombadil and speeding up the timeline, it's pretty similar to the book, and I think they did a really good job adapting it. You don't diverge from the source material of the book until the end of Fellowship of the Ring, where in the book it cuts off at a different point as opposed to where the movie leaves off. But in the grand scheme of things, looking at it as one story, I don't necessarily see an issue with it. But what's really interesting about the books is the Two Towers splits the story of Frodo and Sam's journey, and then Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas's journey. So in the book, those are completely separate. You get everything with Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn, and then the that story ends at the end of Where the Two Towers ends in the movie, and then we jump back over to Sam and Frodo and their journey continuing along when we meet Gollum and Smeagol. So I think that was the point where I kind of decided, I'd always kind of thought this, but it really cemented it for me in reading the book, that after Fellowship of the Ring, I'm kind of more invested in Aragorn and their side of the story. I think it kind of shows a little bit more in the books that not a ton happens with Frodo and Sam and their side of that journey in the Two Towers and the Return of the King. Whereas Aragorn and them, a lot takes place with them. We get a lot more world building. We get all of the stuff with Rohan, which is excellent, and I really love all that kind of stuff. And getting to spend more time with that in the books is also really interesting. Like I said, we get to spend more time in the conversations, more time with the characters. Some of the smaller characters in the story are a little more prevalent in the books because it takes the time to introduce them and bring us through their introductions, their backgrounds, and more motivations and stuff like that. So especially going through the books, I was much more driven with their storyline. Now, I did really enjoy Frodo and Sam's side of things in the book, with, that split of their stories being divided, whereas in the movie it's interlaced. And a lot of that was thanks to Gollum. You get a lot more Gollum stuff in the books. And then even still, they change a decent bit of Gollum and Sam's relationship in the book, because in the movie they're very combative. From the very beginning, Sam does not trust Gollum, and he is not afraid to say it or show it. And where in the book, there's a little bit more of a grayness there, and there's not necessarily a clear difference in opinion on Gollum. Where in the movie, Frodo absolutely sympathizes with Gollum and understands the struggles that he's gone through as he's now going through it bearing the ring, where Sam is much more siding with Frodo. So you get that kind of triangle of combative nature between the three of them. Whereas in the book, Frodo and Sam don't really have issues with their relationship. They stay true to each other, which that is something I think I did like maybe a little bit more in the book as opposed to the movie, is the fact that we didn't get to the point where Gollum has to make it look like Sam is the bad guy. Because that, it works for the movie. I always do, see the point of that in the story, but getting to see that original perspective of the book where that's just not there and Frodo and Sam are kind of through it through thick and thin, I really liked that aspect of it. And I think getting to move and then in from the Two Towers into the Return of the King with Frodo and Sam's story, you get a lot more to it, because most of what's in Return of the King is wrapping up a lot of Rohan stuff and then the final battle with the giant armies and stuff like that. And you kind of get sidelined a little bit with Frodo and Sam's story. Not that it's bad, but it's a little more noticeable now going back to the source material and seeing how much more time we get to spend with Frodo and Sam when Frodo gets captured and Sam thinks he is dead. We get, I think, a few chapters of story along with what was probably about 15 or 20 minutes in the movie, maybe a half an hour. But I really appreciated just that more development with their story and their relationship. I thought all of that was really well done with Frodo and Sam in the book, and I can absolutely see how they had to translate that relationship to the screen from the book. And again, nothing against the movies. I still absolutely adore them and are considered my favorite movies of all time. But I did really appreciate the difference also at the same time, and I think it works really well in the structure of the book. Now, I mentioned a decent bit with Rohan. I have always loved the stuff with Rohan. I think the music with Rohan is like my favorite in the movies, and I always thought King Theoden was such an interesting character, and Éomer and Éowyn's characters I think are so interesting just to see them kind of explored in the dynamic between everything that goes on throughout their journey. And I think getting to see more of that in the Two Towers and especially in Return of the King is absolutely fascinating. I just love the little bit more depth, the few more moments that we get to spend with their characters. As I've mentioned, the longer conversations that we get to hear, and it just adds more well-roundedness to their characters that I think helps them jump off the page a little bit more, as they might have not maybe done so in the movies because it's just so crowded with so many characters. But taking that pacing, slowing it down, getting to spend more time with more characters in the books absolutely works to its benefit there. And then the very end of Return of the King actually diverges a good bit from the movies as well, even the extended versions of them. In the way we get everything wrapped up, we actually get to kind of be a part of Aragorn and Arwen's wedding, as well as Faramir and Eowyn's eventual wedding as well. So I think it's really cool we get to see kind of their story wrapped up, because I always felt like there was something there between them in the movies, but they never explicitly say it or show it. But in the book, it's just straight up, yep, they got married, we get to go to their wedding, all that kind of stuff. And then the journey home back to the Shire. So if you thought the ending was long in the movies of Return of the King, especially the extended edition, there's still a ton that they cut out from the book. You got, I think it's like 4 or 5 hours in the audiobook is just the ending, and many departings, I think it's called in that chapter. And it just keeps on going. But for me, as someone who's so invested in the world and the characters, I just really enjoyed getting to spend time in an epilogue of sorts, of seeing, oh, here's where this character went after all this. Here's where that character went. Here's how this relationship developed. And then just getting to be a part of the journey back home as they slowly kind of go their separate ways. I really enjoyed that part of the book. And then one of the more prominent differences that people have brought up over the years between the books and the movies being the scourging of the Shire, where Saruman is not actually killed like he is in the movies. He actually goes for revenge against the hobbits and takes over the Shire. And we get a couple chapters worth of them having to go back and fight to overtake their home again. So I really loved that story as well. And just getting to see them take everything that they learned on their journey, Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, and actually take it home with them and show how it has impacted them, how it has changed them. And it's just a really, really good set of chapters, and another kind of epilogic, I guess you could say, story that I really enjoyed and appreciated. I did dip a little bit into the appendices as well, getting to see more of the history of the story and the world of Middle-earth. So that was really cool too. I didn't go through all of the appendices yet, but it was just interesting to hear more of the history of it, kind of getting to see how it overlaces with The Hobbit as well as the Rings of Power TV show so far. So it was really cool to finally get to experience Lord of the Rings the way it originally was created and formed through the books. I absolutely loved them. I definitely will go back and listen to those over the years for sure, because it's just a way to experience the story in a new and different way for me, because I've been with the movies for so much of my life. So it's really cool just getting to, while I was reading, compare the differences, look at the similarities, because so much of it was the same, but it was also different. Because I remember having conversations with friends talking about my experience reading through it, and I'm like, it's so interesting because there's so much that happens and you're like, yeah, this is exactly how it happened in the book versus the movies. But then there's other things that happen that it's like, this is so different, but both of them work so well. And so I just got to give props to Peter Jackson and his team and all of the cast and crew involved and how they adapted the story of these books into the film. The differences that there are, the changes that they made, all of them were still really, really smart choices, I think. And I absolutely love that we can live in a world where you can love the books and love the movies despite their differences. So I think that's pretty much most of my thoughts on the differences between the books and the movies, the similarities, and getting to read through them for the first time, which was awesome. So I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments as well, what you think of the books if you've read them versus the movies, some of the things you like that are different, the things that you like that are the same, or maybe even some dislikes. I know there's a lot of people out there who dislike Tom Bombadil's absence in the movies, so I would love to have you join me in the comments down below about that. Thank you for checking out this video, sticking around to the end. I will see you in the next one.